Holland Christian Medium Talk presents
Kids These Days!
Hey everybody, this is Bryant Russ, Director of Faith Formation at Holland Christian School. Not too long ago, I became painfully aware of just how often I said the word hurry, usually directed towards my own children. If your family is anything like ours, you feel the pressure of this constant go, go, go. And if so, I'm guessing you've also felt the toll it takes on relationships. This fast pace has vertical and horizontal implications. In other words, it impacts our relationship with God as individuals, but also with other people, including our families. In his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer puts it like this: the reality is most of us are just too busy to live an emotionally healthy and spiritually vibrant life. Hurry is incompatible with the way of Jesus. The love, joy, and peace that form the nucleus of Jesus' kingdom are impossible in a life of speed. But even as I hear that, I think, what exactly does it look like to be more intentional with our calendars and with our lives? Joining us to think about this question and more is Steve Norman from Winning at Home. Steve is a pastor, an author, a speaker, a coach, and he has some terrific insights on how our calendars might be shaping our children and wisdom on how to parent with greater intention. This is part one of a two-part conversation with Steve, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So without further ado, Steve Norman on Kids These Days. Hey, Steve, let's start out with this. You've been in Holland for how many years did you say?
7 years this summer. Yep.
7 years. What have you been up to since being in town?
So we initially started when we moved into town working with Central Wesleyan and just had a great experience there. I was teaching pastor and oversaw spiritual formation there. And then had a brief kind of detour into the private sector. I had a chance to work at Hudsonville Ice Cream for a little under a year during the pandemic.
Dangerous.
It is dangerous. I always tell people, if you have an opportunity to work for a place that smells like chocolate once in your life, you should do that.
Oh man, yeah.
I used to say that every day at around 9 o'clock there was a quality meeting where the quality team would test the product that was made the day before. And my wife Kelly would always say, she goes, "You don't need to go to that meeting. One, you're not on the quality team. Two, you already know what all the ice creams taste like." I was like, well, just in case they need an extra taster, I wanna be there to help. So that
is amazing. That was quite a dream job.
It was great. I had a lot of fun. And then some things changed during COVID, and I had the opportunity to work at Winning at Home. And so I've been there for just over 3 years now. I help with their teaching team. I'm one of our corporate wellness coaches, and then I also oversee our communications.
Oh, so cool. And you also have a family, yeah?
I do. My wife Kelly is a nurse, so she works at a local pediatrician office here in Holland. She also works at Holland Hospital, and then we've got 4 kids. Our oldest, Grace, is 20. She just finished her sophomore year at College for Creative Studies in Detroit. Our second is Naomi. She just finished up her senior year at Zeeland East High School, and she's going to be headed off to college at Lake Forest, just north of Chicago, in the fall. And then our son Josiah is getting ready to start his sophomore year next year. And then our youngest, Miriam, is going to be an 8th grader.
You have a Miriam?
We do.
I do too.
Yeah, awesome.
That's nuts. There's not a ton of Miriams out there.
Not a lot, yeah.
Okay, so with 4 kids, and that's an awesome range. How old's you said oldest?
So we go 20 down to 13. Actually, sorry, she's 19, and the youngest goes down to 13.
Okay, so this is perfect because so I've got 5 little girls. My oldest is 8. My youngest is 17 months. And one of I'll call it a thing, I guess, that we're experiencing as a family that I'm sure you have too, is just the pace of life can get kind of crazy, especially for you. 4 kids, probably 4 different interests and, opportunities to get involved in a million different things.
Sure.
That's kind of where we are right now. And one of the things that I've had a lot of conversations with families about and am experiencing myself is this is all cool, good stuff, but we're going way too fast.
Yeah.
Is that just you and me, or is that something kind of culturally a lot of families experience, you think? And if so, is it a problem?
I think it's a widespread phenomenon. I think the upside is that kids have the opportunity to be exposed to more interests and activities than they ever have before. Like back in the day, it was maybe you did some arts and maybe you did sports. Like I grew up in I was born in 74. So like I was a child of the 80s, and it was maybe there was some community theater things and then there was some rec sports, but that was about it. Now you can do anything. It's not just does your kid want to do dance? It's what kind of dance does your kid want to do, and how deep into that rabbit hole do you want to go? So I think the beauty of some of the offerings these days is that it really does cater to the uniqueness of every child. And your child as young as age 4 can test drive a lot of different interests and activities and hobbies, and they can test drive one of 1,000 different talents. So the good news is that we're kind of customizing tracks that allow kids to find their own wiring and their own uniqueness. The flip side is it can be a bottomless pit of opportunity. And it can be a huge drain on our time, our energy, and financial resources to plug kids in. But I think that there's this narrative out there, Bryant, that says if you love your kids and you want good for your kids, then you will provide every great opportunity that is out there for them. And I don't think that's wrong. I think that's well intentioned. I think it's good spirited. We all want the best for our kids, but sometimes it can be hard to determine if we're giving them so much good that we're sacrificing the best along the way.
Oh, wow. Well said. Just on Tuesdays alone, Steve, we go from piano to gymnastics to ballet. I know exactly
for the same daughter.
For the same daughter, we joke that like our oldest will have every, she'll be exposed to every opportunity, and none of our other kids were like, all right, we can't do that again. Sorry.
Right.
But one of the things she said to me, this was last year, and it stood out in my mind. I was kind of dragging her along to the next thing. Yeah. We were running late, and I had said the word hurry probably 80 times that day.
Yeah.
And as I'm literally holding her hand, walking her into the next thing, she was talking. And I apparently wasn't even aware she was talking. And she stopped and said, Dad, you don't hear me so well when you're walking so fast. And it was this kind of aha moment for me that there is a price tag to this speed, going 90 miles per hour all the time as a family. And one of those price tags was I wasn't actually connecting with my daughter in the way that I had hoped to as a parent. What other price tags do you see to this 90 mile per hour lifestyle so many of us live?
Yeah, I think that not only is in the rush to get kids all of the different places, is there not a lot of margin for rest, for reflection, for gratitude, just because we're always go, go, go?
Really quick pause. Steve just mentioned how our speed impacts our capacity for reflection and gratitude. And it was just so perfect. This morning, I woke up and my car was dead for some reason. So I ended up riding my bike to work. And it was exactly what Steve just said. Slowing down gave me the chance to reflect and remember things and even just appreciate God's creation as I biked. I showed up to work feeling whole and more connected to God and even my own city. In a way, it was like I was trading the speed my car offers for a chance to reflect and be thankful. And I realized that maybe isn't possible to do something like that all the time, but I thought I at least demonstrated Steve's point.
But I think for a lot of us as parents, whether you're a married couple, whether you're a single parent, it's a lot of those adult relationships get sacrificed along the way.
Totally.
And I run into a lot of other parents who say, wow, in between when my kids were 4 and when they were 18, I sacrificed a lot of meaningful adult community because my whole life was kind of wired, again, around my kids. And to your point, Brian, I think that if we're not careful to take stock, to take inventory, to monitor where our time and our energy is going, we can forget that in our effort to do a lot of things for our kids, we're not clear about what we're actually doing to our kids. And I love that you said that your daughter kind of called you out to be able to say like, hey, Dad, in her own way, is it possible that the pace at which we're moving is actually hindering our ability to connect well? A lot of times, and I'm so glad that you on this podcast have already taken an effort to help parents navigate their kids' relationship with technology. I think sometimes as parents, it's easy for us to forget to navigate our own relationship with technology.
Totally.
And I remember one time talking to a mentor who was a counselor. His wife was an elementary school principal. It says that a lot of times we're afraid that our kids aren't engaging other kids because they're always on their phones. She goes, maybe a greater danger is that we're not engaging our kids because we're checking emails or we're checking, the team calendar and trying to figure out what's next, that we're not fully present for our kids when they need us. And she said this line that I'll never forget. She said, partial attention equals partial value.
Oh, wow.
So if our kids know that they don't have our full attention, we could inadvertently miss windows to capitalize on the most important things that they want to talk about when they do.
Oh boy, I read this quote a long time ago, and it was from I didn't read the book, but there was a quote about 3 mile per hour God. Maybe you've heard this. It was basically said God traveled when Jesus walked this earth. He walked about 3 miles per hour.
That's great.
And it was unpacking a similar thing that we go 90 miles per hour, however fast we go, and saying, well, if Jesus is going 3 miles per hour and you're going 90 miles per hour, you're missing him. You're not going at the speed of relationships.
Right.
Quick pause. The quote I'm referencing here is actually from an essay entitled 3 Mile an Hour God. The author says, God walks slowly because he is love. If he is not love, he would have gone much faster. Love has its speed. It is a different kind of speed from the technological speed to which we are accustomed. It is slow, yet it is Lord over all other speeds, since it is the speed of love. It is the speed we walk, and therefore it is the speed the love of God walks. And I totally know, though 90 miles per hour might feel like the minimum requirement in our fast-paced world of just a million opportunities, it is not at all conducive for relationships. I have to keep reminding myself that at the end of the day, if I accomplish my to-do list or if we make all the things as a family, but I fail to connect with God and I fail to see the people around me, I'm not sure much was actually accomplished anyway. Okay, back to the conversation. Do you see any other relationship impact by this speed in terms of our relationships with our kids or our kids' relationships with each other?
Yeah, I do see that. And I think that sometimes the way that it's worked in our family, Brian, because all 4 of our kids did play sports. Not all of them played club sports, but all of them played school sports. Is there were seasons where life was absolutely pandemonium. And we had to say, you know what? We can sustain this for 5 weeks, but we cannot sustain this indefinitely. So sometimes it's okay to be able to say, all right, it's if our kids are going to be involved in extracurricular activities, it's not realistic to expect that maybe every single night, every single school night, every single family member is going to sit down for dinner every single evening.
And
like
sing
that's just
and have a nice family devotion.
That's just not reality.
Okay.
But on the flip side, it's really important for us to be able to say, okay, it's going to be crazy for 6 weeks, and then we're going to commit that it's not going to be crazy after that. So sometimes it's like you can run in seasons, and there's a biblical principle in there, right? Like God gives us the idea of Sabbath to be able to say we can run in cycles. And one of my daughter's club coaches for soccer, he said, you know what? I think it's really important. His personal philosophy was really important that his athletes took the summer off. He says there's just something from his perspective that wasn't entirely healthy in committing to the same sport for 11, 12, 13-year-olds 24/7, 365. Club and travel sports are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Like there are dollars to be made in it. So it's really important for us as a family to be able to say, are we deferring our family's well-being to a coach, or are we owning that? Like, who gets to dictate our schedule? Do we get to dictate our schedule, or are we surrendering our calendar to an external outside party? I once heard a pastor say this. He goes, our calendar doesn't tell us what we're supposed to do. Our calendar tells us who we want to be. So sometimes it's really important for us to just sit down as a family and say, who do we want to be? And what are the things that are important to us? And what does community look like for us as a family? What does worship look like for us as a family? What does service look like for us as a family? And then where does sport fit?
Quick pause. I've found that actually spelling out what we hope to be our family's values can be revealing or exposing, in a sense, when there's a gap between articulated values and my actual life. For example, if we say we want to value this thing, or we want our kids to grow up valuing this thing, but experiences related to it aren't anywhere on our calendar, all of a sudden I realize I can say that all day long, but it's probably not an actual value. Okay, back to the conversation.
And I was a local church pastor for many years, and I know a lot of church pastors are like, hey, sports are ruining kids and they're tearing apart families and they're bringing people away from church. And I'm not saying that those aren't valid concerns, but I think that sport can be really meaningful if we approach it from the right angle.
So, okay, back up, because you just described something that sounds really important, but I think maybe families need to be equipped in how to do that a little bit more. At least I do. You use the term take inventory, and I have this picture of examining the family calendar and saying, okay, what are our priorities? Who do we want to be?
Yeah.
How do you actually do that?
I think for us, it's been really important to be able to, before we make big commitments, it's really important for us to know what's our why. And if our why is we're going to do a sport or activity so that we can make meaningful social connections, or are we going to do a sport or activity just so that we can stay active, or do we feel like our child is gifted and disciplined and they want to play at an elite level? Those are all different kinds of questions.
That's helpful. I would not have even thought of that. Yep.
So for us, when we had our craziest spring was a couple of years ago, we had all 4 kids in activities at the same time. And one of the greatest gifts that I had was from a family pastor at the church that we used to work at. And I remember he and his wife teaching a seminar, and somebody said, how do you do it all? And they just had this great gift. And they were like, we don't. It's okay to be able to say, on this week, we can't do everything. And so I remember that. I'll never forget that season. Our son was in lacrosse. Our other daughter was in lacrosse. Our senior was playing varsity tennis, and our sophomore was playing JV soccer. And we humanly could not make it to everything that needed to happen every time. So we would prioritize, and we would say, if there's a game, we're going to do games. And if it means that another kid has to miss a practice, then that's okay. So for us to look at each week and say, what can we do without running completely ragged, and how do we do that well?
So I've had this before where I think, oh, this is a busy season, and it's not ideal for long term, but it's a season. But I recently caught myself saying, hey, the winter months, I was like, oh, it's so busy, I can't wait for spring. And then spring, oh, it's so busy, I can't wait for summer. Oh, summer's so busy, I can't wait for fall. And realizing that, wait a minute, if I'm not careful, I think every season could be busy.
Right. As we're having this conversation right now, our kids have just gotten out of school last week, and I was always under the impression that, like, oh, when school gets out, things are going to be easier. I actually felt like, oh, I'm going to get to sleep in. Well, I forgot that my daughter has club swim, and she actually has to be at swim earlier than she had to be at school, because I was running carpool rather than leaving the house at 7:05. Today I left the house at 6:50, and so I'm like, wait a second, how did this happen? And you're right. That's why it's so important for us to just keep a finger on the pulse, to be able to say, what is actually happening? And that's why I think it's so important that we be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to not just the schedule, but to every activity that we undertake.
Thanks so much for joining us for part 1 of this conversation with Steve Norman. I hope it helps you reflect and think about that question: is our current pace shaping us into the kind of people we actually want to be? I also want to remind you that there's so much grace in this process, especially thinking through how this is really a moving target as children go in and out of seasons, and the balance has to be constantly reconsidered. One thing I've found helpful recently is considering the differences between being busy and being hurried. High school principal Miles Calago shared this with staff from a sermon he'd recently heard, and basically he explained how being busy is sometimes unavoidable. It's a full schedule, a lot of activities. It's an outward condition that is often physically demanding, but can remind us of our need for God. Being hurried, on the other hand, is an inner condition of the soul. It's preoccupation. It's not being fully present, can be spiritually draining, and causes me to be unavailable to God and the people around me. While there will certainly be seasons of busyness, part of what it means to follow Jesus is to go at his 3-mile-per-hour pace, even in busy seasons. That has more to do with our hearts and minds than it does with the external things we're all trying to navigate. Okay, thanks so much for joining us. Go Maroons.